A reality we cannot escape as makers is that we are adding objects to the planet. And to do so, we use materials, some of which might have an impact on the environment. How extensive this impact is often information that is hard to retrieve, which means we might not be aware and therefore not feel the urgency to change our ways. Today I'm excited to welcome an art historian who actively challenges the big questions that surround our field, shining a light on the issues surrounding materials, unpicking our human desire for the wearing of jewelry, and carefully tracing the stories of small objects. Saskia reports for online forums, platforms, and magazines, and therefore is the perfect guest to ponder all that is jewelry with me today. Welcome, Saskia.
Hello. Thank you, Sophie, for inviting me.
So, Saskia, to start, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
What I do? Well, I live with my husband and three children in Bussum, not too far from Amsterdam, and I'm an art historian, and I'm interested in jewelry. I'm a big enthusiast for contemporary or art jewelry, and I write about it, for example, for two big international online forums. And what fascinates me is what things, so objects, mean to people. Recently, I've explored the materials that jewelry is made of. As you can imagine, gold, for example, that's a material with 1,000 legends attached to it. But at the same time, this mythical material has a very dirty side to it. It can only be extracted from the mountain or the soil or the riverbed in a harmful way. Gold comes with an ecological or a social impact. And then the question is, what do jewelry people do with that awareness?
Those articles have been really interesting, and I have a couple of questions about them later on. But maybe just to ask, as a trained art historian, you could have sort of focused your attention on a range of art disciplines, but you said you became fascinated by jewelry and smaller objects. Where do you think that fascination has come from?
Yeah, that is relatively new. I think maybe 5 or 10 years at the most. Because to be honest, Sophie, I was not trained in jewelry history or applied art, but it was in architecture or the history of architecture and town planning. But in my liberal arts faculty, there was this one amazing history of architecture professor. So there I went, and everyone wanted to be in his classes. But in hindsight, frankly, I should have stayed with fine arts or applied arts or archaeology or something. But then, so I meandered around a bit, and then I found I sort of fell in love with fiber art, with textiles, and that's where I came across jewelry made from textile. And then there was this whole new world opening up to me that I had no idea. And for me, as an omnivore, it had a big advantage that this jewelry that I found out about didn't make me choose because everything was there. All the materials, glass, gemstones, metals, ceramics, wood, fibers, recycled stuff, and also the techniques that it could be any material, any technique. Now I saw it and I knew that I would be there for a while because it is so rich, this world. It's small, but everything is there. And what was also new for me was that connection to the body, because that's an exciting aspect of jewelry that, yeah, it's something that you wear on the body. Yeah, come to think of it, maybe that connection to architecture is still there, that I keep my eyes peeled for jewelry that has something to do with architecture. And there's not a lot of that, but personally, I see parallels. And there's, for example, this one wonderful brooch in the collection of the foundation in the Netherlands that is called the Françoise van den Bos Foundation. It's a brooch by a Dutch artist, Erik Kuiper. And you can clearly see that he is a builder too. And to me, there are these parallels that when I was in university, we were taught about the a new building or a new neighborhood or area that could react to the traces of human occupancy that were there, or not, or decide not to react to that, of course. And another aspect that I liked was the human scale, that there are some squares that are dead or deserted, but then there is the Campo Grande in Siena, and how come that has a comfortable feeling? And architecture has to do with movement, for example, like you walk through a city or you drive and you see it evolve around you. Like you drive your car down the strip in LA, for example. And all these things, architecture and jewelry have the parallels. It's a human made thing. There's the body and there's that movement. So then there's just doesn't really matter what scale it is. It's the same kind of thinking, I think.
That actually totally makes sense to me. And yeah, all of those are important to a jeweler when they're designing or making. I wanted to pick up on something that you mentioned in terms of that as soon as you started looking, a sort of whole world opened up. And I wanted to ask, do you think that contemporary jewelry is still very much shielded away? And what do you think maybe could be done to make it more accessible to the general public?
It is still possible to make room to make it more accessible or discoverable, if that's a word. But on the other hand, it's also it is something for connoisseurs. It's not for everyone, maybe, like some types of fashion. So it would be a crazy goal or ideal to have everyone walk around with art jewelry. But if, for example, now there is still a group of people that has not had the opportunity to know about it and would have loved it and would have said, oh, this is something I can express myself with, then that would be terrible waste. And then I would say, yes, please, let's all try and get these people on the wagon too.
What pulled you in? So was there a specific piece that suddenly attracted your attention, or how did that then happen that you suddenly discovered this field?
Because I've been always attracted to small things that don't reveal themselves right away, that are not screaming in your face. That jewelry that once I see that you are wearing this ring that is a very compacted thing, but full of meaning, then it's so intriguing for me. I mean, I'm sure other people will be very bored by it, but maybe the small scale, the possibility that you can imagine touching it and holding it, that is also important for me. Even if you can't physically hold it, you have an imagination or a memory of previous experiences that make you imagine that feeling. And the fact that it is worn on the body is very exciting and even dangerous. I mean, it's so persistent and it's so present. If you wear something and you talk to me, then that's a sign. I have to. You're communicating something, and I have to do something with it, and you feel it too. And it's not like I see a stationary painting and I don't like the message and I walk away from it. It's there's much more at stake because it's in the public space and it's between us and it's moving. I think that extra layer of wearing is fascinating. Yeah.
I love what you just said, sort of the alignment of a person with a piece of jewelry. You can't, if it's your friend and you don't necessarily enjoy the piece, well, you can't just defriend your friend or walk away from your friend.
No.
You mentioned you are interested in the meaning that people attach to jewelry, and as you've just described, so people navigating towards specific pieces of jewelry. Could you perhaps expand a little bit on what you yourself have sort of investigated and discovered to date around this theme?
It's almost like you think of a philosophical question if you talk about meaning, because that's the field of philosophy, meaning. But it makes us human. We see meaning in things. We see a horizon or a friendship or a flower on a rock face or anything, and we immediately attach meaning to it. But then with jewelry, apparently there are small things that we upload with meaning, and we also want to keep them close to us. So that's, I think, I'm not saying I understand how this came about, but it has been around for such a long time that there must be something in it. That, because, yeah, to answer your question, that's where the magic lies for me. Those archaeological finds, the prehistoric pierced shell, or a bird's claw, or a small stone with little traces of wear. They must have been worn as ornaments, but why? Maybe they warded off evil, or they channeled the powers of the thing it came from, like maybe with that eagle, the talon of the eagle, and or they were meant to attract a suitable partner. Who knows? But we can't ask these Neanderthals anymore. But I think it's safe to say that it didn't feed them, it didn't house them, and it didn't keep them warm. And even today, we don't need jewelry, but we have it. So I think it's very fascinating that it is such a constant, and it's so persistent. But the meaning in those pieces, yeah, there will be lots of guessing what has driven them to wear these things.
Yeah, that's hard to believe, isn't it? So, most recently, you sort of mentioned you turned your attention to histories behind jewelry materials and sort of questions about materials raised in what we call the Anthropocene, with materialities of jewelry shift in this digital age, and then the stresses on the environment, as we are all very much aware, demanding this increased attention from us all. What do you think is necessary for jewelers to engage with? What made you want to explore this area? And where has the subject taken you so far?
I didn't look at it as an opposition between a digital world and then the material to anchor you or something, but the background was more the concerns about what we are doing to the world in this era called the Anthropocene. It started for me 2 years ago. There, I was seized by many initiatives on material research, not in jewelry, but in design, for example. And there was an excellent exhibition, cooperation between the Cube Museum in the Netherlands and the Cooper Hewitt in New York, called Nature Collaborations in Design. And many of the projects that were shown there were also presented at the Biennale in Milano. And there the theme was broken nature, a bit more pessimist as a title. What they presented, that was alternatives, like, for example, linen, so you could avoid cotton that takes so much water to grow and to process, or fruit leather that was made from the leaves of pineapples that otherwise would be thrown away, or shapes that grew themselves out of mushrooms, or bricks made of coffee grinds, lots and lots of seaweed and algae. And I had the feeling that all this activity and that whole debate that was in the area, our neighboring area of fashion and design, but maybe a little bit less loud in contemporary jewelry. So then that triggered me to take a closer look at people who did work with those notions. And I didn't know too much at the time. Like many jewelry lovers, I knew some, of course, about gold and pearls and the sometimes cruel ways that they are sourced. But I don't want to do a shock report, but so many stories of child labor and modern slavery and coercion and criminal networks and smuggling, but also the ecological dilemmas, like mine pits that scare the landscape and toxic substances ending up in the environment. But then still, we have to use materials, not only for jewelry, but we use objects, and how can we limit the damage? So that was how I became interested. And then I found out about some alternatives, like jewelry people decided to use materials that were discarded, so that were already not part of the economical system anymore. And other people used reconstructed stone or reconstructed pearls or coral. It's like the components are the dust of the original material, the real thing. and some binding agent. But then there were also, that this is something you know all about, but the man-made stones that are grown in a lab that have, as you know, very interesting implications for the design also. But all these materials that are alternatives and make you stay away from mining virgin materials, they, unfortunately, I found out, also have their ecological downside. So then you can also wonder how sustainable is that, and maybe think back of that gold again, which is that I realized too, like gold and aluminium, they are not so pleasant to extract, but then once you have them, they are wonderful materials because you can melt them, use them again, and they never lose their qualities. So is that maybe a direction to invest more in using what's going around already, electronic waste or the things they find in the bottom ash of incinerators, or dental gold, or your and my grandmother's old gold, also possible. Along the way, I found out that there are so many facets to this sustainability question. So I think if you would ask me where it has taken me, I think I'm at the point where I think that mining is really a bad idea, that I would be very suspicious of. And also materials coming from animals is good to be suspicious. But even if you avoid those, then you're not necessarily green. And, you know, as soon as you wake up, you make an impact. You, me, the maker, the wearer, the supply and demand. So I think the only thing that we can do is to inform ourselves and then make a choice and go ahead.
Recently, I had a sort of exercise myself where we were all asked to sort of document all of the materials that it had taken to produce a certain piece of jewelry. And it was just a silver piece. And, you know, you start to think, okay, well, it was silver. But then, oh, these tools I've used that are steel, they were made in Germany. And then actually, you know, I put it in an acid bath so that I could remove the oxides from soldering. And then I've actually had some parts cast, which, you know, used investment casting powder, which I had no idea what it was fully. I mean, I knew it was plaster, but there are other components in there. And it was as if I've opened up Pandora's box, you know, more and more and more popped out. And I wanted to ask, do you think it is important all jewelers start asking these questions and maybe engage with these discussions? And yeah, in what ways do you think this is happening now? And how could you see this engagement be increased?
Well, I think that in traditional jewelry, like commercial jewelry, maybe, or brands, or how do you call it, there is a lot going on already. And I think the academies for contemporary jewelers, they will have to follow suit. It has to be part of the curriculum, and it is in many schools. I don't want to say anything bad about those schools that do pay attention to this topic. So yes, there should be attention for it, and there will be, because there is no way of escaping this question. Well, if you think of a piece of jewelry as a concept and a technique and a material and a form, then that aspect of the material was not very much spotlighted. But now it is much more because of this awareness gaining strength. You can't just use a piece of coral anymore and say, yeah, it's because I like the ocean so much, or I like the color red, or no, there is now another connotation that is being heard. It was there, but now it gets its voice, that it's connected to ocean warming and to protected species and whatever not. So that is also a voice in the many layers of meaning of your piece. So I think that there's really no way of escaping this topic. Also, on the other hand, it should not freeze you from, it should not prevent you from acting. We all have to, the flow, there has to be a flow, or we have to stay in motion. And I think I'm also quite hopeful, because there is a big increase in awareness. And for example, when I was young, I felt very woke, and this word didn't exist, but I felt like that when I was telling my grandmother off for wearing a fur coat. But at the same time, I had no idea about ivory. I thought gold was great, but there was a big mercury problem then already too. And blood diamonds, I had no idea. But now, the generation that is leaving art academies now, I think they have a sort of an inborn eco instinct, I would call it. I think we can be hopeful. Yeah.
I love that, an inborn eco instinct. There is one book, Donna Haraway, Staying with the Trouble is the book. She because you started talking about corals, and she talks about artists who have engaged people in knitting coral reefs, and it became super popular across the whole world. And she talks about sort of entanglement without physical touch, because that is really quite interesting. Could we make references to gold without necessarily using gold? And I don't know, there might be something there.
That's how it works. If you find an alternative to say what you want to say, the exact same message, I would say. Yeah.
And involve people in the discovery as well. That's quite nice in a way as well. My next question is around the coronavirus pandemic. So obviously this has disrupted our world, and I wanted to ask if you feel this has also changed any of the things that our attention to other problems, or in general other things in the field, and what are your thoughts on how this might influence the future of the jewelry field?
I miss the feeling of picking up a piece of jewelry, or at least walking around it, or being close to the piece physically. And I hope that will return. But I hate to say it, but for me personally, there was a big upside. The investment in we have all witnessed the investment in techniques to share what you're doing over the internet, like Zooms and podcasts and studio tours. Yeah, that has been a big COVID bonus, as they say, for me. It also made me laugh that my jewelry friend here in the Netherlands, Esther Dornbus, she said, she had spent the weekend in the World Jewelry Museum in Seoul. And she said, she loved the museum and there was so much to see and the people were so nice. And this was all from her armchair in Amsterdam. And I could completely understand, because also I thought, would I ever have had the chance to visit, well, for example, the gallery Fingers in New Zealand, if it wasn't for that Archery Forum live event via Zoom? So those things make me very grateful. But I realize at the same time they are not viable as a business model. These Zooms they emerged, and there were no real encounters anymore, and people wanted to market their things. So in this new situation, a lot of digital content was given away for free. And I do hope that the galleries and the artists had some payoff from that, for their marketing investment, let's say. But there were also more informative Zooms that were also free. And I think we can easily spend a couple of euros or dollars or reals or whatever to make it continue after this horrible situation is over, because now the artists and organizations cannot do this for free forever.
When we talk about sort of the events and all the things that were happening online, I totally agree. They were amazing and there was plenty, and it's wonderful to hope that some of these can continue. You write for a platform called Klimto too, and there are other institutions you've referenced. Do you think they could play a role in sustaining this?
I'm usually not that adventurous in setting up new structures, because if you take Art Jewelry Forum, for example, they had a large audience already, and then they started their wonderful series of these live talks, and it immediately caught on. So I think, leave that with the people who know a lot already about getting in touch with people. Yeah, it's a good question, because I, for example, sometimes miss more platforms, more magazines, and then I think there is more room for that. maybe a younger feel to it also. And the only organization that I could think of now is Current Obsession. This is a platform based in the Netherlands, but working internationally. And they have a very good eye for all things fresh. That it's maybe something that they could take under their wings, and they do that already because they bring together people on a physical and digital scale all the time.
Evidenced by the many articles you've written. You are a prolific writer and in a way an educator, because you try to engage the audience and share something you've seen and engage them in what you've discovered. So what writing to date are you sort of most proud of, and are you working on anything new that you're happy to share?
Oh, but did I hear you mention educator? Because I don't think of myself as an educator. Although maybe I do, because I hope that there will be some discussion from what I write. That's true. And that article or thing that I'm most proud of, I once started by addressing the use of animal materials in jewelry. And this was about jewelry that was made of wings or beetle wings and ivory and bone and feathers and complete dead birds even, taxidermy. And I felt there were questions that you could ask, but then it also seemed at the time to me that in contemporary jewelry, it was sort of the custom not to ruffle any feathers and swallow your curiosity, and just, if you had questions, then just refrain from it and say, interesting, fascinating. So, but then I wrote the article, and in hindsight, that was not very activist or overly brave, but for me, that was the first time that I started to ask questions. And still, I don't want to point my finger, and I don't want to forbid any materials. On the contrary, I think all materials should always be a possibility, but there's no solution or ethical standard. But maybe if we talk about it a little bit more, then we can approach that better ethical standard. And oh yeah, and the new articles, yeah, there are many bits and pieces, and that was really nice. I was in touch with a jewelry maker from Saudi Arabia, Abir Baghdadi, and she's a very strong and wise woman, full of energy. And she's actually there at the beginning of a sort of an emerging contemporary jewelry movement. So I thought it was really exciting to talk to her and hopefully see what's going on there in the future. Oh yeah, there's another a Dutch maker, Françoise van der Bos, who died very young, and she was avant-garde in the 70s. And I had the opportunity to talk to some of her contemporaries who are still around, luckily, and just to record what they have in terms of memories of that time. And I spoke to a wonderful lady that she owned one of the 3 original black and white bracelets that Françoise van der Bos had made, and she bought the first one of those 3 first one in 1970. That bracelet had always been her favorite, and it was now dented in some places. But what I liked very much was that during our talk, I also listened to the jingling of that aluminium bracelet, the original, that iconic bracelet. So that was a moment when I loved what I do. But I think the main team I will be focusing on materials. I have a lot of ideas still to explore and to work out. For example, I'm a big fan of the idea that a material is not as inert as we think. It may be more alive, or it has more stories to it than you think, and it can be even restless or vibrant, and it can influence you and shape you back. So that also has to do with the idea that we are part of a network. So if you are working on that stone on your bench, setting it in your ring, then it's not just you in the room. There is someone who faceted that stone. Before that, there was someone who mined it. And then if you are talking about being thankful to all these co-authors, I would say, Then you can also think of the mountain and the ore that provided that stone for you. So that it is about a mutual dependency with organic and non-organic and human and non-human actors. But it also has some interesting implications for the notion of authorship. Because if you are not the only one working on that piece, would you sign it with your name? And I think we're sort of seeing the end of the era of the superstar jewelry maker signing his piece with his name, like there's no before and no after. I'm saying he, but it could be a she too, but sometimes it was a he. I'm thinking of he's, I think. And the authorship could maybe become something that you share with a group. So a group of participants who collaborate and they all contribute to the end product, but they don't sign with their individual name. They sign with the name of the collective. I'm actually not that far in my research. I would be very interested to get in touch with collectives that work like this with jewelry, because I only know of these things in fine art. But who knows? And who knows? We're moving into an era of less ego.
If you have a caster who casts, and like you say, a setter who sets, and an engraver who engraves, and a faceter who facets your stone, and you're the designer, why is any of their contribution less valuable than yours? And who decides?
And then it can also continue after that, because then there is me, the wearer, and then I take it from there. But I'm also maybe part of that same activity that influences back and forth.
There is a really nice YouTube lecture of Jane Bennett talking about vibrant matter, the book that she wrote, and she looked at hoarders, and sort of her hypothesis was that hoarders just had a better sense for the pull of materials. That idea that matter has sort of a pull, hoarders can't get rid of their materials, like they keep everything get, so she's sort of saying that they sort of have this extra sense, and that we all in a way could learn something from their approach to materials.
There was a nice talk by a Dutch philosopher, and he just covered the whole gamut from the Wunderkammer, and then collections that became public, like museums. And then why do people do that? Do they want to show off their status, or do they have, like these hoarders, a certain heightened sensitivity with those objects? Or that was objects or materials, maybe we can group them together. But I have heard someone speak about hoarders and jewelry. So yeah, we must be those crazy people too, that we like this stuff.
Oh, I'm very much looking forward to reading what you'll write.
But I don't know where all these things will end up, because I've also had wonderful ideas that I pitched, turned down, and then so it's always a bit of a lucky shot what ends up on the pages of a website. So we'll see.
Do you take them to other places then if they get turned down, or?
Well, in the case of our jury format, you know how this works. Are these submission rounds, and then I sometimes very sad and sometimes very happy. And for Cleaned O2, that material series was, I was so happy. That was a commission. So Leo Caballero, he asked me, and then I have some ideas that I don't know where they will end up. It's not really with any structure or plan.
Authorship, materials, sustainability. These are the topics of discussion contemporary jewelry makers should be engaging in. There is no one more interested in stimulating discussion through her words than my guest today, and I would like to thank you, Saskia, for your time, your insights, and all you have already researched for us. We are very lucky that we can join you in your discoveries and cannot wait to read what you will share with us next. Thank you so much, Saskia.
Thank you, Sophie, for having me and asking me all these questions that were sometimes quite hard, but I really loved our conversation. Thank you.
Next month, I will be joined by another guest, so watch this space to find out who it is. But for now, this was Sophie Boons for the BAJ podcast episode titled Thinking Matter with Saskia Vaness. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful day.